You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the fifth Doctor story, The Awakening. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to follow The Secrets of Doctor Who in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on TuneIn, in your favorite podcast app, or watch us on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you should hit the bell to get notifications. You should make sure you subscribe and leave a comment. We do have a lot of great listener feedback, catching up with the season finale, Empire of Death from the 15th Doctor. So we're just getting all that together for you. So stick around to the end of the show because we'll be sharing all that with you. And finally, I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. Naturally, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are found, or at mysterious.fm. So, Jimmy, can you give us a recap of The Awakening?
This week, it's Doctor Who versus Civil War reenactors. English Civil War reenactors. The Fifth Doctor, Tegan, and Turlough land in 1984 in the village of Little Hodcombe to visit Tegan's grandfather, but he's disappeared. And the village is reenacting some famous local battles between the Roundheads and the Cavaliers from 1643, only they're taking things much too seriously. It turns out that Tegan's grandfather, the local historian, discovered an alien presence called the Malice. The Malice is a living being that was re-engineered to feed off psychic energy, amplify the violence of battles, and clear the way for an invasion. Its primary form is that of a giant creepy face behind a wall in a church. Only when Tegan's grandfather told the local leader, Sir George, about the Malice, he decided to use it for his own ends. He's been ramping up the local Civil War reenactments to feed it psychic energy, and he plans for the final reenactment to be a real battle with real fighting and dying. And he's going to burn Tegan for reals as the May Queen to give it more psychic energy. Then he'll use the fully re-energized Malice to take over the Earth, only as the Doctor explains, the Malice is really using him, and as soon as it's powerful enough, it will fulfill its programming and destroy everything locally. The Doctor and gang battle various manifestations of the Malice and eventually defeat it. The Malice, knowing that it's lost, then causes the church to collapse, but the Doctor gets everyone to safety in the TARDIS before they spend some time with Tegan's grandfather. The end.
So, your overall impression, Jimmy, of this one?
Well, it was okay as a story. It's only a two-parter, which was nice. It apparently was cut down from originally being a four-parter, and the writer wasn't too happy about the rewrites that were made. But, it moves quickly, and it's nice to have a shorter-form story. This one is sort of a remake of The Demons from the Third Doctor's time, where you have this evil, sinister presence that's causing people to take things too seriously and get violent with each other and stuff like that. It's an ancient evil that's, pent up in a local situation that someone's trying to exploit, and it ultimately goes badly for him. So it's kind of a 1980s update of the Daemons.
It's also reminiscent of that Fourth Doctor story where we had the aliens made of stone blocks. That was
Stones of blood. Yeah.
Stones of blood. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Only that was comically bad as a monster. This wasn't as comically bad.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it was a two-parter, and this actually will be the last two-parter, whether it's two 25-minute episodes. From this point on, all two-parters will be 45 minutes each. So basically the length of the previously standard four-parters. It felt like with this one, I mean, it moved right along, but it was all action. Like I just didn't feel like there was a lot of plot. So there's a lot of running around and a lot of, interesting action happening, but not a lot to talk about of what's going on. So I kind of, I don't have a lot of notes on this one. Couple of high points. Like the highest point of this one is the fact that there's no Chameleon in this. After having brought in Chameleon recently, they aren't including him in this episode, although apparently he had a deleted scene.
Yes. Yeah. There was a scene that was at least written that had Chameleon that didn't make it into the show. Yeah. So there's some interesting stuff in here. One of the things that was most interesting to me is whoever wrote this or rewrote it knows something about psychic research as of the 1980s, because the doctor explains, is talking to the local historian lady or local school teacher
Mhm.
about the malice, and he says it requires a focus and to gather the psychic energy, and she says like a poltergeist. And I was like, wow, someone knows their stuff, because historically, what a poltergeist was understood to be is a disruptive spirit in someone's home. That's in fact what the term poltergeist means. Poltern is German for noisy or rattling, and Geist is ghost. So it would be a noisy ghost. It makes thumps, it makes bangs, it moves objects and stuff like that. Interestingly, the term poltergeist seems to have been coined by Martin Luther, because it first appears in his writings. And Luther was not a fan of the Catholic Mass. And so the way he dismissed all poltergeists as deceptive spirits, because
Mm.
they always ask for mass. They want mass said for them, and stuff like that. And that can't be right. So it must be a deceptive spirit.
That's a pattern for Luther. Like, let's get rid of the Book of James because it doesn't fit in with my preconceived notion of the way.
Yeah. But and so historically, there have been poltergeists reported. I mean, we have surviving reports that go all the way back to, late into antiquity, like the 600 or the 500s. And it's always been assumed that they were a spirit. But then in the early 20th century, parapsychologists started to notice that at the center of a lot of poltergeist cases, there is a single living person. This was noticed, for example, by an early 20th century parapsychologist named Nandor Fodor. And incidentally, he was the subject of a recent Simon Pegg movie called Nandor Fodor and the Talking Mongoose, which is based on an actual case that the real Nandor Fodor did. Although being a movie, I know they take liberties with it. But Nandor Fodor noticed that at a lot of these poltergeist cases, there's a single living person who's like always present whenever the activity happens. And that person is now referred to as the poltergeist agent. And then by the 1950s, a theory had been proposed that what a lot of poltergeists actually are is a phenomenon called recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. Psychokinesis is mind over matter, so that's the PK part. It is spontaneous because no one's trying to make the PK happen. It just happens. And it's recurrent because it keeps happening. So that's recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. And the proposal is that you've got a living human being who's under stress and they feel like they can't vent their frustrations consciously. And so their subconscious throws a fit and starts psychokinetically banging and rattling and moving stuff around to vent those frustrations. And this theory gained support in the late 1950s with the Seaford poltergeist case in Seaford, New York. It's also called the Popper poltergeist case because in this instance, the poltergeist would unscrew bottle tops and just pop all these tops off of bottles. Kind of like symbolism of, I feel like I'm bottling up all my frustrations and I'm going to blow my top. And we actually covered that on Mysterious World. That was a Catholic family, the Herman family of Seaford, New York. So people can check that out if they want. But what I found fascinating here was someone who was involved in scripting this understood the concept of a poltergeist agent. And so when the doctor says the malice is like this focus for this psychic energy, it needs it, and the school teacher says, oh, like a poltergeist. It's like, hey, someone knows their stuff here. This goes beyond what I was expecting. It's interesting. Now, just because RSPK is a possibility for a given poltergeist case doesn't mean that's what it is. It's also possible that a spirit could be involved. And there's actually a difference in the terminological usage in North America versus in England. Here in North America, we tend to use the word poltergeist exclusively to mean RSPK. And if there is a spirit involved, we would say, oh, it's an apparition of a spirit and they're doing poltergeist activity. But if we just say poltergeist, we mean RSPK. Whereas in England, if anything moves, it's a poltergeist. And then the question is it caused by a spirit or a living agent? So it even seemed like they were kind of reflecting the North American usage here a little more, but they weren't really going into it in that depth. But I was just pleased that someone knew their stuff on this. They also brought in the concept of psychic projections, where the malice, according to the doctor, is causing people from the 1600s to psychically project to now. So at various points, they get menaced, for example, by people from the 1600s who are servants of the malice. And the doctor says they're psychic projections. And okay, so that's another concept in parapsychology. Those are commonly called tulpas or thought forms. But somebody kind of knew their stuff on this. I was pleased with that.
So if folks want to listen to the 3 episodes that we covered in Mysterious World, the poltergeist. So the more general poltergeist one is episode 195 at mysterious.fm/195. The 20th century poltergeist, which is an interesting one involving computers and electronics, that's episode 260, mysterious.fm/260. And the popper of the poltergeist is 295, mysterious.fm/295. So check those out if this is piqued your interest. So couple interesting things I just jump out at me right off the bat is like we have yet another remote isolated village where
Folk
weird
horror.
things are happening.
Yeah. Typical
it's that
horror setting.
Yeah, and if you watch any British television, this is a very common thing. There's lots of murders in the English countryside and lots of weird supernatural happenings in those same villages. So it was interesting. So the main setting is 1984. Mm-hmm. But they're reenacting 1643, and there's that confusion at the beginning. Like, where are they? They're aiming for 1984. Doctor, you've landed in the wrong time. I think it's Tegan who says to him, And it's interesting to me that the Doctor can precisely land in the right village at the right time to visit Tegan's grandfather, but he can't get her back to the airport on the day she needs to be there. It's kind of funny that they kind of ignored that little detail in doing this. It's kind of
funny. There's also a great line in this where, so the local leader is Sir George, and he's playing the same role in this that the Master did in the Daemons. The Master was trying to use the Daemons for his benefit, and here Sir George is trying to use the malice for his benefit. He wants to take over the world with it. And it's not initially clear, just how bad he is, because he's one of these, British upper class villains that is pretty suave and comes across at first as reasonable. And so, he's less enthusiastic for using violence than a lot of his underlings are. And so like when the Doctor and Tegan get taken prisoner, he's like, oh, of course you're not prisoners and stuff like that. But then later he captures, and he'll tell them things like, you're free to go, but there are reasons why they can't. And so he kind of comes across as reasonable, but he becomes more and more unreasonable as time goes by. And he at one point tells, I think it's either Tegan or it's the school teacher, you're about to take part in an event that will change the future of mankind, because he's planning on using the malice once it's fully charged to take over the world. And the Doctor objects to this, and Sir George says, you speak treason. And the Doctor just says fluently. That's a great line. It's actually taken from something else, but it's a great line.
Yeah, that was really good. There's a few cute lines. I'll have one to share at the end of the episode too. Sir George, you mentioned he plays the Master's role. He kind of is a little bit reminiscent, not a lot, but a little bit reminiscent of the Anthony Ainley Master. In the sense of he's not like the Roger Delgado Master, who was very urbane. always had, his evil plans, but was a reasonable fellow. Ainley is a little more scene chewing, and Sir George ends up being a little bit more like that. I mean, he kind of goes into the John Sim master, if you will. By the end, he kind of loses his mind, but he's very reminiscent of the master in this, which is interesting because now that you say that, I see it's almost like they wanted to have the master in the story, but for whatever reason they couldn't bring him back.
Well, they just had the master in the previous story with Chameleon in the King's Demons.
Right. So maybe it was too soon. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, and so as you said, Sir George is demanding everybody in the village take part in his war games, as they call it, which, we're not in medieval times. Do local aristocracy still have that ability to kind of...
Not like even in the 80s.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting to me to see. And... I think a lot of people, including the one fellow, the one reasonable guy, let me just find him, Colonel Wolsey, was more reasonable. He just was in it to have some fun, dress up, like a lot of reenactors, dress up, and then at the end of the day, tip back a few with the fellows around a campfire, and, we've had some fun. But then there's Joseph Willow, Sergeant Willow. What a jerk.
Yeah.
I just right away, this guy's wanting to shoot people right off the bat. It's like, wow, this guy is a little too taking it. But it's kind of funny because if you've ever been around groups of reenactors, there's always that one guy who's a little too into it. Like, okay, Joe, settle down. We're just playing here. So it feels kind of a little true to life.
Yeah, and they are already partly under the influence of the malice, so their emotions in this matter have already been hyped up a bit.
Yeah. So there's another character who shows up, and I'm a little confused by this one because it's this Will Chandler, and
he is from 1643. The doctor initially says he's a psychic projection too. It turns out he's wrong. This is Will Chandler really is from 1643, and the malice has somehow brought him through time. So, and I wondered, given his prominence in this, if they were setting him up to be a new companion. And
apparently they were.
Then pull the plug. There are conflicting stories about that. There are some stories that say, he was being considered as a companion role. Others say, no, not really. So I'm not sure what to think on that.
Yeah, it seemed, I don't know, it was weird because he just seemed out of, it's not a pun, but he seemed out of place as well as being out of time, because nothing else from the past comes through other than the psychic projections, and he's just kind of there running around with the doctor. There didn't seem to be a reason within the story to have this particular character here at this particular time. So maybe they were, if they were setting him up as maybe another Jamie character,
or maybe another
man
Ace.
Out of time.
She's in this weird place because of a time storm.
Yeah.
It's like, how, what? It's really just to get an excuse to get this character on the table.
Right.
And so you can rationalize it as well. The malice was bringing psychic projections through time, and here he went a little too far and actually pulled a person through time.
Yeah. It seemed odd to me they didn't do more with that, with his being out of time. Even just, he knows all of this, the reenacting stuff, because he's lived it. So maybe he could have been a source of information for the way that they bring down the malice and, Sir George. But that really didn't come about. So it seemed a little lacking.
Yeah, he does get to kill Sir George though. Because at the end, the malice's face in the church, and the malice has other manifestations too. Like there's a little creepy gargoyle of the malice that appears in the TARDIS, like clinging up on the wall by the ceiling, which is, it just slowly turns its head. It looks creepy.
It was creepy.
But its main manifestation is as a face behind a wall in the church. And gradually more and more of the wall cracks away so we can clearly see the face. And the face is animatronic, and it gets closer to the wall and stuff like that. And ultimately, Will realizes that Sir George is bad and pushes him in to the Malice's face so that he kind of gets electrocuted or something. And Will explains it by just saying, "It be better he be dead."
Yeah. I have to say, for the 1980s, the design of the Malice is kind of creepily effective. I mean, it was pretty creepy looking. And
unfortunately, they also have really low res computer graphics that they're also using as a kind of twinkling effect that looks terrible.
It does,
But the practical effects look good. But the electronic effects they were doing it's like, okay, guys, this is Pong level. This is not even 16-bit graphics.
I mean, you got to this is around the time of Star Trek: The Next Generation. They had better CGI was available at this time. They just weren't paying for it, I guess. Was the Malice part of the fabric of the church? Was it walled up by the people? I didn't get that.
So apparently, and they don't go into this in a huge amount of detail, but they indicate the Malice has been here for a lot longer than 1640. It's much more ancient than that. And apparently the church was built around it, or it began to manifest in the church at some point. There's a I don't know that it's the baptismal font, but there's a carving in the church that is based on the Malice, where the Malice is represented as the devil. And
I think it was a pulpit. Yeah.
I think it was a pulpit. And so I don't know, why would you build your church around an evil thing? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. It's like the opposite of putting a relic of a saint in the altar. You know what I mean? It seemed kind of odd. And although I have to say, when it was the crack in the wall first appeared, I'm like, oh, that's like the crack in the universe from the 11th Doctor's time. Obviously, totally different, but it reminded me, and I wondered if the design of the crack in the universe might have been inspired a little bit by this one. But in that one, it was also kind of like a bit of a smile, which was kind of creepy.
So one other thing that this got right in terms of parapsychology was, so like at one point the Doctor here goes into the church and he hears men shouting. This is a remnant of some battle from the 1640s, and it's described. I forget if they use the word. They may actually use the word, but it's a haunting. And in parapsychology, the term haunting does not mean what you would think. A ghost is not actually involved in a haunting. That's an apparition. A haunting is a place memory. It's like a recording that was laid down by living people at some point. And so this echo of this shouting centuries later is also a known parapsychological phenomenon, or a reported parapsychological phenomenon. And so it was having that, I thought, also was nice and indicated somebody knew some of their stuff.
The Doctor says that one of the ways he figures out that there's an alien presence is he finds this metal called Tinclavic, mined by the Pteroleptals on the planet Raga, which I missed because I wasn't on this episode when you and Father Corey discussed the episode The Visitation from the previous season. So they make this connection, but there's nothing more to that connection. They just kind of name drop it.
Apparently they wanted, so the Pteroleptals are in the Visitation, and they lead to the Great Fire of London, and they also destroy the Doctor's sonic screwdriver, which is why the Fifth Doctor goes hands-free for a while. I mean, and they apparently were thinking about having the Pteroleptals in this, but they didn't end up pulling the trigger on that. But they do get a name check. And I like the Tinclavic. It looks like it's like a kind of silvery metal, because almost all metals are silvery, but it's squishy. And so it's like not as liquid as mercury, but not as solid as at room temperature as most metals. It looks like they got some kind of industrial putty and used it for that.
Yeah, suitably alien. That's I like that. Yeah, but the Malice is from the planet Hakol, or Hakol, Hakol. I forget how they pronounced it. So it's part of a space probe, basically a psychic projection space probe from this planet.
And the Doctor says it's a living being that's been re-engineered as an instrument of war and sent here to clear the way for an invasion. And they hang a lampshade on that and say, well, what happened with the invasion? The 1640 was, there was, 240 years ago at this point. And the Doctor says, I don't know. It obviously never happened. I'll have to look in the records. The end. So we never get any further explanation of that.
I mean, it feels like that could be a thing. I mean, like in reality, you that's the sort of thing that could come up. Like, oh, he was probably sent here as part of an invasion force, reconnaissance, and they never showed up. Who knows? I mean, well, maybe we'll go look it up. Like, maybe they're on their way still. Who knows? It's like, okay. It took me longer than it should have to understand that the Queen of the May was what we here in the U.S. would call the May Queen.
Oh, really?
In older traditions, that's what that was my sense. I like the Queen of the May. What does that mean? I think it was the use of the definite article that kind of threw me off. What is the Queen of the May? I mean,
it's the woman who presides over a celebration of May Day.
Okay, is that a pagan origin?
No. It's just I mean, May Day itself is a Christian thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, anything that's medieval, people are going to try to say, oh, it's pagan. No, it's not. The 1st of May and having a celebration on the 1st of May, that arose in the Christian Middle Ages. It's a Christian thing. There are various customs. Like people will do Morris dancing on May Day and stuff like that, which Morris dancing is another thing that people say, oh, it's pagan. Yeah, actually, no, it's from the Christian Middle Ages. And as part of various local customs, there are a bunch of different, over in England, there are bunches of different local customs for different times a year, including May Day. And like in some of them, they gather rushes and strew the rushes on church floors and stuff like that. And they have they have a rush cart with all the rushes, and they strew them around the place. They have Morris dances. They have community festivals. They have a May Queen and a May, sometimes maybe a May King. And it's like the King and Queen of the Prom. It's just like they have this low key ceremonial function for a day. And here, because this is another attempt at folk horror, Sir George wants to have Tegan be the May Queen, and then he wants to burn her at the stake to gin up psychic energy for the malice. And by the way they spell malice is, I know it sounds like MALICE, the emotion malice, but they spell it MALUS. So they've given it a Latinate spelling, but it's a trait name. It's clearly meant to reflect the emotion malice.
But it's supposed to evoke the Latin word mal for evil, I guess.
Yeah.
Too, so, so speaking of the May Queen, Will Chandler, our 17th century character, seems to say that May Queens were always burned to death during part of the celebration, which is a very weird
nonsense.
Thing.
That never would have happened in the English Civil War.
Why? I know why, but I'm going to bring it up anyway.
Local maiden. That's just ridiculous. Not in a Christian country.
No. Why do the war games create psychic energy for the malice to use? Like, what is the mechanism that we're going for here?
I don't have a problem with that. I mean, it's basically just strong emotion. You get people, in strong aggressive emotion, and that's what it does. Is it gins up and feeds off of aggression. And so this is a form of controlled aggression that Sir George can get people to engage in as a form of play that the malice is then going to amplify into real aggression for the final war game, where people will really be killing each other, and that it'll feed off that and fully power itself up.
Oh, okay. I guess, yeah. All right. Yeah. I didn't feel like it was really explicitly, or maybe it wasn't, I just missed it, but yeah.
It's basically aggression and other hostile negative emotions that it amplifies and feeds on.
And by pretending to be in a war situation but ginning up the real emotions by doing real aspects of war and the various violence. Okay, I get it. I mean, it's probably because Sir George it could have been taken any form, but Sir George was a reenactor, so let's take that form because he's got the cool costumes and weapons to go with. So I can see that.
Now, I wasn't 100% clear on this, but it looked to me like the people of Little Hodcombe were on the side of the Cavaliers, because I didn't really see a lot of Roundhead costumes, at least not among the nobility. So for people who may not be familiar with the English Civil War, the Roundheads were the forces of Oliver Cromwell, who had deposed King Charles I. And then the Cavaliers were the supporters of the monarchy, and they ended up reinstituting, after the defeat of the Roundheads, they reinstituted the monarchy with King Charles II. And Horrible Histories has a really great video for King Charles II. You should watch that video. It's awesome.
If you want an extended, really good discussion of the English Civil War, there's a podcast called the Revolutions podcast, which does a whole season of it, and he's really good at doing that. So that would be, I would recommend that. I remember I listened to that with my kids, and they really enjoyed that. There was it a second Doctor story that featured an encounter with the Roundheads too? Was it the second or third Doctor? I forget. They run into the Roundheads who have passed through time. Trying to remember that. It was recent. Oh, it was third Doctor, because I remember Sergeant Benton was in that one. So, okay. Yeah. So, any other notes on this one, Jimmy?
Not particularly, although hang on just a second. There's a really interesting line I want to get right. So, yeah, the Charles II video by Horrible Histories is called "The King of Bling," and it's all about Charles II. It's really good. There's a particular line in it I like where they're talking about Oliver Cromwell, and Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan, and so he had a reputation for being very pious and very down on anything fun. And I find it interesting how British treat their Civil War differently than how Americans treat theirs. The British are a lot more chill about it than Americans are, which frankly I think America could imitate. But there's a bit in The King of Bling where Charles II is narrating, and he says, King Charles, my daddy, lost his throne and kings were banned. They chopped off his head. Then Ollie Cromwell ruled the land. Old Ollie wasn't jolly. He was glum and he was proud. Would be miserable as sin. Only sinning's not allowed.
That's good.
Yeah.
Actually, there's another good line from this one where after Sir George describes what he's about, the Doctor says, "History is littered with loonies like you," which was a good line. So I did mention earlier, so that'll do it for our discussion of The Awakening. I did mention we have a bunch of feedback on the Empire of Death, so let's get to that because some good stuff there. And the first feedback comes from Christopher on YouTube, who says, in the episode, our discussion, Jimmy says, quote, "Using death to counter death, I'm not sure that really works," end quote. The Paschal Troparian begs to differ. Christ is risen from the dead by death, trampling death, and to those in the tombs granting life. And then he says, Christ pilled, Doctor Who confirmed.
I'm glad you found delight in that. I would say that the Paschal Troparian is using poetry here because it's not really death that overthrows death. It's really Christ that overthrows death. So I would say the Paschal Troparian is poetry, and so is this part of Doctor Who.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah. I mean, there was Christological
that's always
imagery in this.
You can always see Christological stuff in Doctor Who because he's a hero.
Yeah. Right.
You can see Christological stuff in any hero.
Yeah. I mean, he was saying in it, I am life, bringing life to death or whatever. But yeah, point. The next one comes from USMC935 on YouTube. I read the scene with the mother and the dead child to be explaining how the death travels through time. It's so perverse. It passes from child to parent. And by means of the dust of death traveling through time, it's spread to places where the doctor hadn't traveled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's a reasonable interpretation. I also saw someone else, and this didn't happen on Earth, but at least in this scene, I saw someone comment on how it's even more perverse making parents watch their children before the parent themselves dies.
Yeah. Amy on YouTube writes, I thought it was Louise's stepfather who was not a good person, not Ruby's father. So
that could have been. I may have misheard the line.
Yeah, the Louise was Ruby's biological mom. So we were talking about that line, and it went by fast. If you don't have captions on, and sometimes even then you don't necessarily catch it. It's fast.
I always have captions on.
Yeah, I do too. I sometimes don't catch what was said. Doug's Film and TV on YouTube writes, good review of Empire of Death, and I will admit that Empire of Death really sounds like a sequel to Pyramids of Mars. I do agree with what you say. There are many unanswered questions, and I'm wondering if Russell is saving it for the next series because it kind of looks like it. I'm wondering if the next series story arc is going to be focusing on the Doctor going back to Susan. We heard the Doctor mentioning Susan, but we don't see her. It's like Series 5, like we heard the Silence, but we don't see them till Series 6. Do you think Susan might come back in the next series? And if so, do you think it could be Carol Ann Ford or someone else? I know Carol Ann Ford retired from acting. And
go ahead.
This is the last line. Good luck, Father Corey, with the military chaplaincy. My former pastor was a chaplain in the Army. I hope to see you again in the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Yeah. So retiring from acting doesn't mean you're forever out. There have been lots of actors who have retired and come back. And so I think Susan could be in the next season. And I think, Susan needs to be played by Carol Ann Ford. That was the promise they made all those years ago,
I'll be back.
The first Doctor, they need to pay it off. And so since she's still around, she's still active, she still even looks, relatively youthful, and she's been doing acting for Big Finish. I think they need to do it, and I really hope they do. In terms of how much is they're going to answer next season, I don't know. The Susan thing may be completely unrelated to all this Ruby Mrs. Flood stuff. And I called it Mrs. Flood will be connected with season 2. They're going to pay off the Susan twist this season, that set of storylines, and they did. I don't know that there's much more to tell there because they may, but I don't know that they will. I've seen a lot of criticism that basically agreed with our analysis of the Empire of Death as, okay, the first part of it's fine, but then the Ruby Sunday stuff just falls flat because they really built that up too much and then did not pay it off. And I'm glad to see a lot of other fans pointing that out too, that they agree with that. They're not just giving Russell T Davies a pass, but the problem is they've already filmed season 2. So all this feedback came too late to really materially affect season 2. So I don't know. He may have thought this was a good idea and a good way to pay it off, but wow, it really doesn't live up to what he built up.
Yeah. We do have some more.
Yeah.
Brett via email says, ugh, Doctor Who has suffered from the same problem for years. Overpromise, underdeliver. Many seasons have built up this huge, big, earth-shattering mystery, and rarely does it ever live up to the hype. When the hype is more exciting than the payoff, it has failed. Often, Doctor Who seems to answer these riddles and solve these mysteries and then put the answer in the back seat for the rest of the final episode. I fall for the excitement every single time. Father Corey, I've loved having you on the show. The balance that all three of you have brought has been great to hear. When any one of you is gone, something feels missing. I'll add you to my prayers while you make this transition. I'm glad that the military will be bringing on a great priest, but sad to lose you from the show. I hope Dom and Jimmy add another person to the show to try and keep that balance. If you do, having listened to many podcasts in a similar situation, I suggest bringing on multiple third persons over many podcasts instead of committing to any one person right away, almost like how they do when casting a show and bringing on many different people to read lines for a character in order to see how the chemistry works. So let's talk about that first part of Brett's email about falling for it every time. That has been a common issue in New Who, is this: we build, then we pay off really quickly or very briefly, either at the very beginning or the very end of the final episode.
This is something I noticed in storytelling back in the 1980s in comic books. And I've noticed it across multiple media. Oftentimes creators are really good at rise in action, and then the payoff is not proportional to the rise in action. One of the first places I noticed this was in a storyline in the Teen Titans comic book called The Judas Contract. And they'd had this new member named Tara join the Teen Titans. And then it turns out, and spoilers for 40 years ago, folks, it turns out Tara, the new Teen Titan member, was a spy, that she was working for a criminal named Deathstroke, who is the basis of the Marvel character Deadpool. And she had been planted in the team by Deathstroke and was ultimately going to betray him. And they stretched this out for a long time. And the reader knew that Tara's a spy, but the Teen Titans didn't. And then then they finally have like a 4-issue set where for the climax of it, where Tara is exposed as a traitor, she betrays the Titans and so forth. And basically she's called Tara because she has earth-based powers. She can telekinetically move Earth around, and her powers go crazy, and she dies in like a page of really vertical thin slits of panels. And it's like, guys, you need much more than this to resolve that. It reminds me of a principle that someone, I think it was, was it Forsyth, who was the author of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Let me look that up.
Yeah.
The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is, I don't care about the film, John Le Carré. Okay. I saw an interview with John Le Carré, who's writing I'm not a huge fan of, but someone asked him, what lessons have you learned as a writer over your career? And he said, well, one of them is that he said he got this from someone else, but if there is a fight between two characters, like at the climax of a novel, it must go on for as long as possible because and he said, and I originally wasn't doing this, I'd get up to the climax of my novel and there's a little fisticuffs and it's done in a page. And someone pointed out, no, the climactic fights have been building for a long time. There is lots of emotion. If you've been doing your job, there's lots of emotion and expectation that has been built up for these. The fight must go on for a long time to satisfyingly pay that off. And so what I do when I write climactic fight scenes is I make a list of everything that could happen in the fight before I write it. And then I draw on that list to make the fight as long and satisfying as possible. And I think that a lot of time writers in different media fail to do that. And they can be really good about the rise in action. And it's easy to hint at some big mystery, but you better have a big mystery to pay it off. And in Ruby Sunday's case, they didn't.
Well, and I think part of the problem is they had two things they had to do: defeat Sutekh and reveal the origin of Ruby Sunday's origin, and they didn't have enough time to do both of those in the time allotted, at least to the level they should. I mean, the Sutekh defeat was fine. Actually, that was okay, but then you didn't have enough time to really pay off the Ruby Sunday, and especially where you did such a bad job of her origin.
Yeah. And really the key, the way they'd structured this climax, the season finale, the Ruby Sunday mystery should have been the key to defeating Sutekh. because you've set up something is super powerful about Ruby. She makes it snow whenever her origin is discussed. Unintentionally, something powerful is making it snow. And we hear Carol of the Bells. Maestro gets freaked out about that, in episode 2. Yep. And we've got this woman pointing, and we've got there's just a huge amount connected to Ruby's origin. And to bring that into the Sutek thing, where even Sutek is sparing them so they can figure this out. Unraveling the mystery of Ruby's origin should have unlocked some big, powerful thing that was the key to defeating Sutek.
No, it was the ordinariness of Ruby.
Yeah.
We don't need to go over that one again. But on Brett's second point about we are considering bringing in someone else in to take the seat, not to take his place, Father Corey's place, but to certainly take the seat. But for various reasons, it's not going to be an Alex Trebek style
long
replacement. Yeah, we're just going to have someone who can sit in. It doesn't bear going into the behind the scenes, but
and if they don't work out, we'll ditch them later.
That's right. You're out of here. I got the red button to. All right, a couple more. Intermarifica NM on YouTube writes, the best part of watching the video version is Jimmy's puppy wanting attention. Also, we will miss you, Father Corey.
Yeah. And that
sister's puppy.
My sister's puppy. Yeah. Her name is Luna.
I love to see Luna whenever you're babysitting or puppy sitting. Katarina writes via Facebook, I have a theory about Mrs. Flood. I suspect she might be a sort of manifestation or representative of the anguish of the past companions. Her costumes have been like those of past companions, and even her name, Mrs. Flood, sort of evokes the pawns.
Mm-hmm.
On another note, thank you so much to Father Corey for offering his time, thoughts, and voice to the podcast. You will be greatly missed, and I pray for blessings on your future. Thank you, Katerina, on behalf of Father Corey. And It is interesting theory, the idea, because I have seen people point out the various costumes that Mrs. Flood has worn have looked like things companions have worn. Even that very final, winter outfit.
Mm-hmm. That's Romana, the first's costume.
Yep. Did River have something like that too in the Husbands of River song too?
Not that I recall.
I thought she was, because that was a winter one.
The first thing when they said her name in The Giggle, when they introduced her as Mrs. Flood, the first thing I thought of was the Ponds and River song. And So I think the idea that she's like a synthesis of companion resentment or something like that is a very interesting idea.
All the companions left behind and abandoned or died. That would
she
be
could be some kind of thought form, from their disappointment.
Even have not Elizabeth Sladen, but Sarah Jane mad being left in Croydon.
It wasn't even Croydon.
It wasn't even Croydon. So thank you everyone for your feedback. A lot of great feedback. This season of for the 15th Doctor's first season, we got so much great feedback, and we really do appreciate that. It really adds to the show, so we are grateful. So now we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Doctor Who, including Brian V, Sebastian W, Stephanie D, Anna F, and Stephen G. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. This StarQuest show is also brought to you by Exodus 90 and the Exodus 90 app, a daily companion to help you grow closer to God and to become the man you want to be. This summer, join the Enthronement to the Sacred Heart, the Exodus 90 Summer Book Club, and St. Michael's Lent, beginning August 15th and leading up to the Feast of St. Michael the Archangel on September 29th. Go to exodus90.com/SQPN for a 14-day free trial to the Exodus 90 app and to learn more about St. Michael's Lent. That's exodus90.com/SQPN to join us for St. Michael's Lent starting August 15th. We'd also like to thank Zyman Yannick, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. What did you think of this Fifth Doctor story, The Awakening? You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or leave a comment on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you can watch the Secrets of Doctor Who. We'll be back next time. We'll be discussing another Big Finish story called Wink, featuring the 6th Doctor and the 10th Doctor, the actual actors, the 6th and 10th Doctor, not substitute actors. So, and it's a sort of sequel to Blink. So, looking forward to that. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest. And remember, tea, a noxious infusion of oriental leaves containing a high percentage of toxic acid. Drink coffee instead.